Call the meeting to order.
Let me double check make sure he's good.
Okay, we'll start with roll call. Chair Kennedy,
Here.
Vice Chair Kraxberger,
Late.
Randy Goodman,
Here.
Anthony Teeters is not here, Arnold Urias,
Here.
and Member Fan is not here either.
Okay, we'll move to discussion and action items. First, the approval of minutes from our March 5th Workforce Housing Committee meeting. Can I get a motion to approve?
Motion that we approve them.
Second.
All in favor? All right.
Aye.
Motion carries. And now we have our long-awaited friends in Flagstaff. Can they hear me right now, Amber? Okay. I just want to apologize for the rescheduling that we've had on behalf of the city, and thank you for your patience in coordinating and rescheduling. So we look forward to hearing all about what the great things you're doing to address workforce housing in your region.
Jennifer, can you hear us?
I can. I just wasn't sure if that was a question or anything, but thank you for having me. Thanks.
Well, thanks for being here. So we had a list of questions that the committee had sent, and I'll let you guys discuss your questions and ask any additional ones you have, but they're up on the screen for anyone who wants to read through them or if we want to go through them one by one.
Hey, Jennifer, it's Randy Goodman. Remember we talked a while ago over
Yes.
Zoom? A lot of the questions that we have for you are the ones that you and I talked about that day, but I wanted the committee to hear them from you. So it's sort of a repeat on a lot of them, if you don't mind. But I really appreciate you doing this, and I want to thank you for doing it. So I'll turn it over to our chair lady. Well, okay, the first question I had was, and you once again you already explained it to me, but for their sake, how do you attract builders to the workforce housing projects?
Sure. Yeah. I wanted to thank you guys for sending me the questions when you did, because I was able to write through like my thoughts on all of them. So I have them pulled up. And so it just interrupt me if I'm going on too long. I can tend to talk too much about a particular topic, and I know you guys have a lot of questions. So, but yeah, so first question, yeah, how do you attract builders to do workforce housing projects? I think the biggest response to that would be just having incentives. We have, incentives in our zoning code. We call them like regulatory incentives that provide, relief from like zoning requirements. Or density bonuses, things like that. It's also really effective to have to bring like a financial incentive to the table. If you can swing that, financially, we have an incentive policy that is funded by our general fund. And it's been that way for years. And it's not a consistent stream of income. Like we don't always know how much we'll get in our pot. But we also, in the last couple of years, were lucky enough to get a voter-approved general obligation bond for affordable housing for $20 million. And of course, not all of that $20 million was set aside for developer incentives, but a chunk of it was. So that is a really big help. And this projects seem to be getting harder and harder to complete. And so being able to come to the table as a municipality with some funding of your own, like if you're asking for the affordable housing, to be able to offer up some money to support that request, especially in the state of Arizona, where it's prohibited from requiring affordable housing. you need to incentivize it. So money is pretty good there. I would say it also helps to have city-owned land to bring to the table as well, to attract developers, specifically low-income housing tax credit developers are always looking for property to do a project and to kind of run all their numbers and see how they can make it work with any particular piece of the land. And I'm not sure how familiar this group is with low-income housing tax credits and the process there, but they get points oftentimes. If they get extra points if they have like a land lease with a municipality. So that's pretty key, and that improves their success. It improves their chances of being awarded tax credits if they have that commitment from the city as well. So, and last thing I can't not mention, it really does help establish a pattern in a place if there's a lot of strong political support for affordable housing. And I really do credit our city council for being really vocal advocates consistently over the years. It's just Flagstaff has been an expensive place to live for a long time. It doesn't really matter who you are, everybody kind of agrees. And so it's been an easy thing for most city council members to like rally around. And so there is that kind of expectation a lot of the time, especially with like a multifamily kind of proposal, that a developer, like, what can you do? So that is, we've kind of had that political support there kind of sets like a precedent, because once you have success one time, the next time developers might anticipate the same thing, especially like in a rezoning case or something like that, if council needs to get involved in the approval process. So
Jennifer,
is that good?
Jennifer, I have a question for you. You mentioned earlier the voter approved bond. Part of that went to incentives for developers. Can you elaborate on the other components of that bond is funding?
Yeah, there was it was a 4-pronged set of activities that were determined by I don't know, I can't remember the official name of it. I wasn't involved with it, but it was like a citizen-led committee to work out the details about, what are we really asking for? What kind of projects do we want to see? And so they landed on 4 different spending categories. One of them was somehow I think they knew what their dollar amount would be, what they wanted to go for. And 7 million of that, I would say a majority of the funding, was allocated or designated for down payment assistance programs for homeownership, which are very effective. It's just always worked. We've had other programs in our community that were general funded. I don't know the whole history, but we've always had some sort of pot of money for down payment assistance programs, and we know they're effective. And so they wanted to put a lot of that bond funding toward that kind of a program. So there's that homeownership element. There's the developer incentives. That was 5 million for multifamily rental projects. And third category that I'm actually working on right now, it's about adaptively reusing buildings. It was $3 million was allocated to assist any builder or developer or nonprofit or whatever entity who wants to acquire a building and convert it into residential rental units. So that money can be used to purchase a property. I think a good example, if you guys are aware of that kind of trend, I guess, of repurposing motels, converting motels to rental units. It's really effective. And so we saw a couple of those in the last few years, and we thought if we can continue with that in a tourism kind of heavy area like Flagstaff, we do have a lot of hotels. So I think we wanted to be supportive of that happening in the future. So there was adaptive reuse activity. And the final spending category was for the how do I say it? Like the redevelopment of public housing units. It was $5 million set aside for us to be able to update and increase the number of affordable rental units on property that the city owns that has our public housing sites on it. So those are the 4.
Thanks, Jennifer.
But Jennifer, before we move on, when we spoke in March, you mentioned if somebody brings a project to City Hall, the building or planning division, how you guys attract them to workforce. Can you speak to that? Do you remember what you said?
When a project comes, I mean, I guess it's sort of like a technical process we've worked out. I would say first off, we have we have a planning department that handles current planning projects, and we have a housing department with staff. It's grown over the years. So they have me in housing to coordinate and collaborate and work really closely with the planning department, and the planners are very supportive. They do a lot for us and with us. And so that's another kind of super, like, really appreciated thing. Like, I don't ever want to take that for granted, because if it was hard to collaborate, or if we just really didn't speak the same language, it'd be really hard to kind of infiltrate the planning process. But they've worked really hard to try to integrate the idea that we are looking for affordable housing. We have policies that support affordable housing at the city, and that information is relayed to developers with their development applications right off the bat. Again, not sure how familiar this group is with, the development process and planning and everything, but when you submit an application for your initial, like a concept plan for a project, the city provides some pretty standard comments. They're just kind of auto comments like, oh, make sure you're in this floodplain, so refer to these sections of the code, or whatever. And so as part of that comment letter, those initial communications from the city, they provide information about our affordable housing incentives to the developer.
Jennifer,
Is that getting at it? Yeah.
Well, no, actually, maybe I misunderstood, but I thought you said to me that anytime a project's brought forward to City Hall, whatever size, scale, you guys mentioned to the developer that there are workforce incentives if they would consider doing that kind of project. Because my curiosity was, how do you get developers to commit to workforce? How do you educate them that it's even out there? And I thought that's what you said to me, and that's what I was hoping the board could hear. Did I have that right, or?
Yeah, we're just involved really early in the development application process. So we let them know in our city communications that we have an incentive policy. Check it out. It might be helpful for your project. I've also attended, maybe what I said to you earlier, I'm sorry, I don't remember, but it might have been that we have in our planning department, they organize pre-application meetings with developers who are interested in understanding how to get started on a project. It's pretty routine. I think most cities do that, where it's like, hey, I have this piece of property. I want to build an apartment complex. What do I need to know? And I will join those meetings and explain, like, oh, okay, if your site's a little tight and you might need relief on parking, take a look at, keep that affordable housing incentive in mind, if that might help your project going forward. And then we often set up, if they're interested and willing and they're trying to understand how the incentive might work for them, they'll set up another meeting with me later to talk about, what does an affordable rent look like? What kind of incomes are we talking about? Those kind of details. So that happens early in their development process.
Okay, the next question had to do with grant and federal funds, but you've kind of talked about that. What about city-owned properties? What incentives do you offer the developers on that front?
For city-owned property, they're allowed to use whatever like zoning incentives we have. I wouldn't say that you have to be very careful with the gift clause legislation in Arizona, and our attorneys are always all over it. It's not as if you can incentivize the developer. If they're looking to purchase a piece of property it's not as if you can give them like a super, screaming deal. It's usually going to have to be like, it's been a really long time since we've arranged an agreement with a developer to purchase property. But incentives should apply to city property as well. And technically with our bond program, we have $5 million to assist the developer with the project, like to redevelop our public housing. So I suppose that could be considered an incentive as well, that we do have funding to bring to the table in addition to, obviously our own land. So is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, but where does that funding come from? How do you get that resource?
Well, we had of our affordable housing bond that provided $5 million toward the redevelopment of our public housing sites. And so we do have that chunk. We're not far enough on that. That's going to take a lot of years to work out. First, we have to find a development partner. But I think them knowing that we do have some cash to assist with the planning process, I don't know how that money will be used exactly.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Arnold. I have two questions. Hopefully, I'm not interrupting your answer.
That's okay. Go ahead.
The first question is, if I understood you correctly, that $5 million came from a general fund, or did I misunderstand that?
I'm sorry. It was a general obligation bond, GO bonds that are voter approved. So that was that when I was talking about the 4 different categories of spending we had for that $20 million bond, that had to go through a whole voter approval process. So that was not the city's, the general fund that the city has. It's like its own cash. We used that general fund to fund an incentive policy that we have.
Okay.
It's I can see how it's confusing. Sorry.
No, thank you for clarifying on that. We'll be sure to follow up with you offline on the details of that, so see if we can relate that. But with regard to elaboration on the adaptive reuse or repurpose of properties, do you have a moment to clarify, is the city working with individuals who are actively land use violations that they may be looking to sell those properties, or proposing that they sell those properties if they cannot remedy the violations according to the current code requirements? Are you actively prospecting those properties to propose repurposing for the purpose of selling to a developer or a builder that would want to repurpose for workforce housing development?
Wow, that's interesting. No, it didn't work. I don't know if you would I think maybe we'd call them like distressed properties. I have not coordinated with our our code compliance department to try to target certain properties. I can see though how that would be an incentive for that property owner. Say, hey, we have this program where, if you sell it to whoever, rather than try to remedy the issue yourself. I think it's an idea worth looking into if you have a handful of properties that are that come to mind like that. I don't have those. All I know is we have a lot of older kind of aging motels in Flagstaff, along Route 66. And those are the motels that have been converted by nonprofits actually for, overflow, shelter, single room occupancy, transitional housing projects. And so those were just transactions that the nonprofits worked out between them and the motel owners. I've heard of a nonprofit in town who is in, they successfully converted an older motel into a transitional housing project. And they have other motel owners contacting me saying, hey, would you buy another one? So that's kind of where we were coming from with it.
Jennifer, sometimes it's getting a little hard to hear you. I don't know what we can do to fix that. Our next question, though, was, and you and I discussed it, if the city reimburses for permit fees or plan check fees, where does that money come from for the reimbursement?
Sure. You know what? I can turn my video off in case it's causing a delay. Should I do that?
That would be fine.
I'll just do that. Sorry, guys. Yes, so the reimbursement of city fees that you mentioned, that money is general money. That's how we do it. And like I said, you just kind of it's a process every year during budget where you kind of, as a department, you kind of assess like, okay, what should we ask for? What are our needs? And you just put your request into the budget committee and see what they come up with. Obviously, they might, city can't afford to just grant whatever you ask for every year. So, but that is where that money comes from to pay those fees.
So basically out of the general fund then?
Yes.
Okay, the next question was, do you guys encourage smaller workforce projects like duplexes or fourplexes, small stuff?
We do. I don't know that it's encouraged over other things. I think it comes down to what your zoning code permits. I think a lot of the time, cities don't have code provisions for what we kind of are calling missing middle now these days. But we might be seeing a lot more of that there was a state legislation that passed that's going to require all cities to allow those smaller housing types in single family zoning districts. So you guys might be aware of that or talking about that a bit more. So hopefully, we do want to, as a city, we do want to encourage more of that moderately sized housing type.
Okay, when you do that, when you have workforce as part of an overall development, say it's a certain percentage of a larger development, at what point do you require the workforce part be done? In the beginning, in the middle, the end? When do you require that be done?
If it's a like a multifamily, like a rental situation, which is historically, we do tend to see more like a traditional apartment complex kind of development. So rental. That the delivery of those units should be treated like all others. We usually ask that they just be affordable housing units. They can float. They don't need to be set in stone. Like this unit right here is always going to be affordable. We kind of leave that to the property managers. But as far as like if it's a larger project, let's say it's a multifamily project with 4 large buildings, maybe 15 units in each or 20 units in each building. We can work out in a development agreement or a plan that says that affordable housing units need to be interspersed throughout the development to the extent feasible, and should be made available as soon as a certificate of occupancy. So it could kind of be, proportioned out. If, like I said, if it's a large project and there's 4 different buildings, then that first building should have a proportionate number of affordable units come online. Does that answer it?
Yeah, I think so. But with that, how long do you require them to remain workforce if they're part of a larger development where they have market value and workforce intermixed? How long do you require that they remain workforce?
30 years. And that number comes from, it's just consistent with low-income housing tax credit projects. Those have a 30-year affordability term. So we just aligned it.
Jennifer, kind of piggybacking off of that, do you guys utilize a tiered system where based on percentage of project or percentage of maybe their income demographic, et cetera. We're looking at that kind of an approach for our policy. And I was just curious if you're using that, if you could share what that looks like, and also what you did to come up with those categories, like what your research process was.
That is, yeah, that in short, yes, we do have like a tiered sort of system where the lower the AMI, the more generous the incentive. What makes it hard is I wasn't here when those tiered systems and the policy and the zoning code was all developed. That was before my time. I'm just working with, the results. And generally it works, but it feels a little bit more complicated. It seems to look pretty complicated in the code. So if I were to redo it, and we do anticipate redoing our policies to kind of take a look at those income levels again, take a look at some of those thresholds that we identified, and how might we need to update those. It's hard. I think what's hard is knowing what your community needs. I think you could inform yourself through just like census data, like what is our workforce earning, and what percentage of our permanent residents here are at which income level, right? And so trying to target target your categories or your, the tiers that you have, target them for your local workforce. I would also recommend separating out and like really clearly delineating ownership versus rental categories. And obviously having different income levels for ownership than you do rental. We did do that, but I think it's a little clumsy. And then once it's in your code, you're just set with it. There have been many projects, especially with home ownership, where I wish we could just snap our fingers and have the ability to work with a developer on a little higher income level than what is identified in the code. And so that's what's kind of hard. If something ends up in a code, like a zoning code, it's a little more burdensome to change that. So maybe, and I feel like I don't have the right answers or like the best practice. We're still kind of figuring it out. But maybe if those requirements or limits are just set up in a policy outside of a code, so that they can be updated more easily, maybe. But yeah, it can get pretty complex pretty fast. So I don't know if I'm making it describing a really clear process, but all I know is, yes, tiering is good, almost in a sense of like the more affordable a project, like our minimum threshold is 10%. In order to qualify for affordable housing incentives, 10% of your project needs to be affordable. And I think that has stood the time or the test of time. I think that's still appropriate. And if a developer wants to voluntarily contribute more than the 10%, then their incentive should reflect that. So that really is that's definitely like a tiered system where obviously your incentive is more generous, the more affordable your project is.
Jennifer, thank you for this. This is great. I'm wondering if you could email a copy of this to Amber, specifically what your tiered system looks like right now, what you would recommend doing differently now that you've been doing this for a while, and why you recommend those changes.
Sure. And I would just preface it that I would send 2 different documents, which is kind of wild. And I would I don't know if when we revise our policies, if we'll try to put things all into one place, like all in the zoning code or all in I'm not really sure. So that's a little murky, but yeah, we have a tiered system identified in the zoning code with a bunch of tables. And you kind of have to go back and forth and reference different tables and all that kind of stuff in the code. And then we have a policy document that has outlined that tiered system in a little bit more easily understandable way. And they don't align exactly. So it's a little weird, but I will absolutely send it to you.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Next question, Jennifer. You said that you require 30 years on workforce if they qualify for the incentives from the city. How do you monitor that and maintain that for that time period?
We have a reporting requirements built into every time we are working with a developer and they're committing, like, yes, we will do a 10% affordable on our rental project. We have them sign, we have them agree to like a development agreement, we call it. It's like a legally binding document. And that document stipulates that they will submit biannual reports to our housing department that verify, the income levels of the tenants in those units and the rent being charged. So every 6 months, our department is going out to all of the property managers. So you have to have staff, right? You have to have people at the city who prioritize this I guess it's monitoring, just overseeing that compliance period. So yes, it is just a back and forth relationship with the property managers. So that's another thing I kind of want to draw attention to is you make the arrangement with, the city coordinates with the developer, at the very beginning. It takes years for the project to get built and, become a reality. And then once those units receive certificate of occupancy, there's a property management company that shows up and you have to start kind of coordinating with them. They're hopefully made aware, of the commitment from the developer and all that, has happened. And you have to, as city staff, pick up a conversation, develop a relationship with a property management company that will be overseeing these units. And I do, yeah, I suppose an upside of this is that city staff do not need to manage these affordable units. They don't, we would never have time. We'd have to have entirely different staffing levels to kind of verify everybody's income and have people sign leases. So you do rely on the property management company to do that work for you. Does that help?
Yeah, no, that helps a lot. And then if I understand, the agreement is attached to the deed. In case the developer sells the property to someone else, they have to honor it because it's attached to the deed, or how do you attach this agreement?
Yeah, it's a little different for rental projects than like an ownership unit. But a rental project, we actually don't deed restrict our multifamily projects that have affordable units. I think you could. We just work, like at the city, we have these development agreements that are required for most developments if it's big enough. Like they're going to have other commitments that they need to deliver on, like maybe a stoplight or, public, what do you call them? Public improvements like sidewalks and curbs and things. And so all those details get put into an agreement and we throw the affordable housing requirement in there as well. So it's sort of like a one big document that outlines all of, what the developer is responsible for delivering. And it says in there, it states that the affordable housing commitment I can't, of course, I can't think of the language. I can send you guys an example, DA, so you can see the language that it will kind of outlive the current owner, and it passes from owner to owner. But it may be cleaner, or your legal may advise you to just record a deed restriction on a property instead. That might be their preference. So.
Okay, thank you. The next question is a big one, and the one I'm most focused on. Well, as a board, as a committee, we discussed density changes for workforce to incentivize so they could have more units on the same size piece of property. And you and I talked about it. Our problem with that is that if a project came to us and there was a density change, it would take a long time to get the density change approved. You guys are out in front of that, if I understand correctly. Could you explain to the committee how you guys set that up so that the developer knows right away what he can do if he does workforce?
I think it just has to do with identifying the density bonus in your code, like getting that put into your code so that any developer who picks up the Prescott, zoning code can see that the base, by right, if let's say you have medium density residential zoning, or whatever you call it there. And under that zoning, you're entitled to build, 12 residential units per acre. But there's a provision in the code that says if you do affordable, then you get a 25% density bonus. So you could identify right there what the new, they could do the math based on the size of their parcel and do that per acre calculation to see what their bonus would be. Is that what you were looking for?
Yeah, it really was. In other words,
Yeah.
So we clearly understand you didn't wait for these projects to come and then change your density policy. You address it up front, and they know right away if they're willing to do workforce, they can increase by blah, blah, blah. And how do you do that? In other words, do you give up parking spaces? Do you give up landscape area? How do you give them more units on the same size lot?
Oh, that can get all of that stuff really gets worked out during the planning process, where it may be, and it's possible that they may not be able to realize the maximum density bonus or the maximum value of whatever incentive because the lot is too tight, or when you factor in all these other building form requirements and code requirements, that it eats away at your ability to truly realize everything. So it's sort of a zoning question where it has to be kind of calibrated. I'll use that word. The zoning code has to be calibrated such that these incentives are reasonable or doable given the other code requirements. I would say coordinate closely with planning, see what your planning department might have to say about that, or in order to accommodate some of these things, maybe some of the landscaping does become diminished, or parking reductions are an affordable housing incentive in our code. If things are getting tight, you can take a parking reduction and you're not required to park the property 100%, and you can take advantage of that reduction as an incentive. Jennifer,
could you also send us a copy of that part of your code that discusses your density bonus?
Yeah, I'll send you guys the entire, it's all, for the most part, it's all consolidated into one section of our zoning code. So if you really want to get into it and kind of read all of the tables, and because we have numerous incentives. Density isn't the only one. So we do have a density incentive, parking reduction, landscape reduction, small breaks on like building form standards, and also a resource protection reduction. I have no idea. Because we have all our ponderosa pine trees up here and they're protected in our zoning code. And so years back, it was identified that relief from that resource protection overlay would be a pretty valuable incentive. It's essentially allowing developers to cut down more trees to make way for their buildings. So that has actually been that's been a very valuable incentive we've realized here. And so, yeah, I will send you the whole code if you want to review it.
We had some questions, or I had listed some questions about market cap and land trust, and I think we're going to kind of skip over that for now and discuss that later unless somebody on the board wants to ask.
Could you just, we know what a community land trust is, but could you share with us how you're working with them? Maybe that would be the better question of, is the city partnering with a community land trust? And if so, how are they doing that?
Oh, our community land trust program is in-house. It's operated by our housing department at the city. But what we do is we partner with a nonprofit in town that does all of our eligibility determinations. So when you have an affordable ownership program like that, or community land trust program, determining eligibility for that program is a big first step. Like that, if you're a citizen in the community and you want to try to take advantage of this, you have an application that you've got to fill out. You got to provide all of your financial information, and someone needs to review all that to ensure that you're within the right income requirement, and that the loan you end up with is actually affordable to you and all that work. So our program is kind of operated and overseen through the city, but we do partner with a nonprofit. We contract for a lot of that, like nitty gritty kind of the eligibility determinations and a lot of that kind of we just call it eligibility. And they also administer our down payment assistance loans. So
is that Northern Arizona Housing Solutions?
Yes, Housing Solutions of Northern Arizona. They do a lot for us. They're really critical to our programs being effective, because we do a lot at the city, but we definitely don't have time. And I don't think it's a good best practice either for the city to be, reviewing everyone's applications and determining eligibility. And it's just too in the weeds. But we have oversight and we weigh in, and it's the policy that we developed. And so, yeah, that's really key. I guess that would be a good takeaway is the city can kind of operate it. Most of the time nationally, you'll see it's nonprofits operating a CLT or an affordable ownership program. And that's great. It just kind of depends on what your city is willing to do, and if you have nonprofit partners that can do the work. So,
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of my last question I had was full-time staff assigned to workforce. Do you have it, and how many, if you do have it?
Yes, we do have several full-time staff in our housing department. We have our housing department overall is sort of split in half. We have all of the people literally in another building. We're not even all in the same place. We have staff that administer all of the public housing programs, so all of the HUD funded kind of federal housing programs that are out there. So the public housing units, the Section 8 voucher program, that all is one side of the house. And then the other side of the house is where I work, where we partner with developers to try to get the affordable units. We operate a CDBG grant program. I'm not sure if Prescott has that as well, but what else do we? Oh, we have someone who's sort of like the face of our 10-year housing plan. A few years back, we developed, it was a huge project to get like a community driven housing plan made. So we did that, and that was one staff person is sort of oversees that. I recently just got a helper to help me do my like development work. So yeah, we've been steadily growing over the years.
But are those salaries paid out of the city's general fund, or do you have grant money that pays those salaries?
CDBG grants are, they usually pay, they have like an administration like fee kind of built into the grants that pays for the person to administer that grant at the city. So all of our housing staff that operates all the HUD programs, like the public housing and Section 8 voucher programs, I'm 99% sure their funding comes from the feds and they're not general funded. My position's general funded, and we have, it's an interesting split. I think it's pretty necessary that a city trying to grow their housing program would need to take advantage of maybe certain grants. Like I said, CDBG funding, I believe that's just kind of built in. So if you get a CDBG allocation, there should be money in there to pay a staff person. I'm sorry, I don't know what Prescott has or not.
We do have CDGB, but for the purpose of our committee, we're targeting 60 to 120% AMI. I don't know if you knew that.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
That's it from the questions I had listed. Committee members, do you have anything for Jennifer?
So, Jennifer, one item I wanted clarification on, this is Arnold. I wanted to find out the burden of enforcement for ensuring that the qualified tenants remain in the properties as presented and agreed upon. If I understand you correctly, that burden falls on the property manager. And if so, in a community like Flagstaff, where there's a balance between priorities of tourism and affordable housing, is that property manager contracted or discouraged from managing any vacation properties?
Oh, okay. That's kind of harder to answer. I think some of our more recent, like new construction projects I've seen come through in their development agreements, where they're making their commitments to the city, including affordable housing, they'll oftentimes agree to prohibit short-term rentals. Or what they really do is they prohibit leases shorter than 30 days on their property. And so they make that commitment up front really early on that this, apartment complex or condo development, is not allowed to become a short-term rental facility. So those commitments are being made by the developers up front, and property managers would need to comply with that agreement. But there are also,
But the enforcement, the specific to the enforcement of those agreements, is that overseen by staff that you have at the city level, or is that burden 100% on the property manager?
I think the best answer is it would have to be a give and take, I think, on both sides, where we would need to do some level of inquiry if a new, for instance, like if we do have someone at the city who they operate a short-term rental licensing software. It's not through housing. It's so that they can collect a like a licensing fee from each short-term rental, and it requires them to sort of register in our system. So if they were to see like an entire complex come online, there would have to be some coordination internally at the city to say, hey, were they restricted? Did they agree to not put units online, and kind of double check with their DA? That all has yet really to come to fruition because it's just been so recent that developers have started agreeing to not do short-term rentals. I think what we see older properties or, apartment complexes or condos or whatever that have already been built and have been existing, they make, their owners make a decision to put units on Airbnb or whatever. And they have the right to do so if they never had any restrictions. So I think what you're describing is more likely like a future issue we're going to have to watch for and coordinate on. And I think the way that we would be able to catch it internally at the city is through that like registration software that we have to try to track how many, short-term rentals are out there, who's the owner, who's operating it, I think that's, so I guess the answer to your question is the city would be mostly doing that compliance work.
I have a question on the ownership side. When you do have an ownership to a final owner, is there a time limit or time restriction on when that can be sold? Is there a metric that keeps that in place for the price of the house when it gets resold, or is there a deed restriction, or how does that work?
Yes. Yeah. So the ownership restrictions are a little different. So what's considered permanently affordable ownership housing, we have a 99-year ground lease that secures that affordable home or keeps the home affordable from one sale to the next. And you can do either a ground lease or a deed restriction on the unit. It just kind of depends. We've learned recently we had success getting some affordable condos. And of course, you can't have a ground lease on a condo because it's just airspace, right? So deed restrictions are what we use both, depending on what the unit type is. And yeah, so each owner agrees to restrict the resale pricing on their home if and when they decide to sell. So that's that equity limit or that equity cap that comes into play. It's basically like a math equation that limits the resale price so it's affordable to the next person. And all those restrictions and that, those guidelines and requirements are outlined in the deed restriction or the ground lease that each new owner recognizes.
Awesome. So that'll be in the documents you send us too.
Yeah, I can send you the like a template deed restriction and ground lease that we use.
That'd be awesome. Thanks.
Jennifer, I'm just curious. I'm guessing that you overall are tracking all the positive outcomes of your workforce housing programs. Is there data or just overall big picture outcomes you could share with us? And conversely, can you also share potentially any pitfalls that you've encountered, things that we should be aware of as we're crafting our own policy recommendations?
Oh my gosh. We might need another meeting for that. Okay. What do we do? We, I think I've noticed, I've worked in our department for about 11 years, and the reporting has only really been a priority or really kind of kicked in the last couple of years since we've had a plan, because the plan outlined some goals. And prior to that plan, we just kind of had programs. We were just like, we have this money and it depends on where the money is coming from, like how accountable you have to be about it. So with our CDBG grant, there was always reporting in place, but our other stuff was just kind of one-off things, just to see if we could do it, and then they'd work. And So yeah, I guess I would say our accounting and our reporting of our achievements has really only become more kind of official in the last few years since we've had a housing plan. But I do know that we would put out like our own sort of section reports, like an annual report. We've done that for a long time, where we would just say, oh, in this last fiscal year or calendar year, kind of depending, we built 5 new ownership units, or 13 new affordable rental units came online. And so that was sort of how we tracked or shared or published achievements, if that's what you mean. There's also our Housing Solutions, our nonprofit partner that conducts our ownership programs. They are required to report out on like demographic data, and they track things in a much more formal way than we do at the city. And it's because they operate off of a lot of federal funding. So I don't know if it's not the cleanest answer, but I think a lot of how you account for your successes is dependent on what funds you use to operate. And if you're just local, just your own general fund money or your own local program with your local requirements and that kind of a thing, like it's kind of up to you how you want to show your successes. And annual reports have kind of become our standard. And we do have reporting on a quarterly basis for our plan. So we literally track like, X number of new units were built. And we break out how many of them are affordable, how we account for like people who have received some sort of a subsidy, if it was like a down payment loan or, yeah. So there's that. And then I guess your question just about pitfalls and what are lessons learned and things like that. It really does help to lean on data to make your decisions. I think that's anytime any big decision is being made, that's always, the sort of proper way to go about something. That doesn't mean it always happens that way, because, you can get politics involved, or you can get a certain, groups involved with things that kind of steer things one way or another. And that's okay, as long as it's all going toward you're improving from where you had been. But yeah, anytime you can really understand the needs of your community and design policy to meet those, that's great. And that's a win, but just know that might need to be adjusted over time. I think I kind of would have benefited from, or I think my job would have been a little bit smoother if we had more of a framework every year for like a reassessment, maybe even every other year. Like, let's reassess. How's our program working? Does anything need to be tweaked? Because at the city, for anything to change, you have to get city council approval. So that's sort of the benefit of when a nonprofit is in charge of this. They can it always seems to be, I don't know for sure, I've never worked for a nonprofit, but it always seems they can kind of make changes a little bit faster than the city can. So I've always been, it's such an uphill challenge at the city, if you have like a city run program, to be nimble and dynamic and kind of shifting as things change, because by the time you prepare to change something in a program, it's already been undone, and like market forces are different. You know what I mean? So just know that there's no like silver bullet. There's no like perfect way to address every issue. If you try to design programs to be flexible, inevitably they're probably not going to be flexible enough, and some time will come where you just need to kind of rethink it. I don't know, that's kind of like that's a weird answer, but it's just how it feels hard sometimes to amend programs that we already have up and running, just to get the data to make the best informed decision, and B, get through the process in a way that's fast enough that you're actually being responsive. So yeah.
Thank you. Are there any just overarching programs that you started out with that were just a complete failure?
There might be, who might have a little bit more knowledge about that is our CDBG grants administrator, because she works really closely with smaller groups and nonprofits and organizations, and even, like county programs and agencies that apply for funding to like launch a project or a program, or to try to do some kind of an activity that might not work out. And so that might be a place where that is more likely to happen, just because the nature, like it's like a smaller, more experimental sort of environment, if that makes sense. With our, like the city programs I've been involved in, it's not that things are like a flat out failure, or they just are never being used or effective. It's just like with our zoning code incentives, there's so many ways that it could be written better. It could be like, updated or tweaked to be more helpful as you're applying. If you have like a project that's going forward and the code is just like not really helping for that particular situation. So in that sense, it feels like it's easier to feel like something is failing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is. It's just project dependent, maybe. Yeah.
So I think that's what's overall so helpful for us to be talking to you, is you've personally been there for 11 years. You've been doing this work, and you're referencing on numerous occasions that you've learned, how you might change the code, how you might change these policies. I think we really, as a committee, would like to know as much detail as you could possibly provide on what you would do differently, whatever that looks like, because, we may as well not reinvent the wheel and learn from perhaps your experience.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to help. And I think our Tiffany Antal is our zoning code manager, and I work really closely with her. She's so smart. People who understand zoning codes and who write them, their brain just works different. So it might be, it's just so technical, and if you nudge these numbers over here, they might have like unforeseen consequences over there. And you just don't know all of that until you start having projects come in and you apply the code to different scenarios. And you're like, ooh, I can see how that code might need to shift. So there's absolutely always going to be little adjustments being made. I think it's like healthy to think of the zoning code. Like once you guys get a set of incentives identified and put into code, just accept and understand and know that they may need to be tweaked and adjusted over time. And that's okay, because you only really learn like once a project comes through and the codes are applied. But those types of programmatic, like the incentive work like that, it's so technical. The money stuff is almost easier, right? Like I can't say that just identifying a funding source is obviously the hard part, right? Like, where do you get the money in the first place? That's hard. But once you have it and you can use it on these really key, on fees, like to help a developer pay for this and that, and they can count on that. That's almost easier. I think the code stuff is the hardest. Or other program design things, like how if you're starting an affordable ownership, like a community land trust program from scratch, there are a lot of resources out there now to help people establish them correctly, and kind of identify best practices for that. I don't know if this group has ever heard of Grounded Solutions, but they're like a nationwide network that tries to help mostly nonprofits, but anybody, help them get permanently affordable ownership programs put in place. And so they have like template ground leases, and they have template deed restrictions that they're trying to circulate, nationally, so that everybody can get started a little faster. Because these programs have become a lot more popular in the last few years, just with homeownership becoming so challenging. So there are entities like that as well. We're definitely not the end all be all, but I hear you, because it helps in the state of Arizona too, because we're not like every other state. And so when you have Arizona examples of a program, I think it's like extra valuable. So
Thank you, Jennifer. I agree. There's a lot of great examples out there, but we definitely appreciate, we know that it takes time to put this together for us. So thank you for taking that time and sharing those resources with the city of Prescott. Very much appreciated. Does anyone else on the committee have any questions right now? Well, I wanted to, Luther nudged me earlier with a good suggestion. And since we've got some engaged friends here in the audience, does anyone have any questions or comments for Jennifer while she's still with us? All right, thanks. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for your time. I know you've got Amber's contact information. And again, thank you for spending that time to send us all of that information.
you're very welcome, guys. I'm glad to help. Thank you.
And thank you, Randy, for going up all the way to Flagstaff to meet with her.
Well, I wanted you guys to hear what she was saying firsthand, and rather through me, some things get lost in translation. And I'd like to kind of pitch something to the committee as moving forward in the next year. When I look at these 14 questions that we asked, or that I had typed up for her, number 10, I think that's one that we can really sink our teeth into and get something done. If we can preemptively say to a developer, if you do work for us, you can increase your density by this, and you can eliminate parking space number this, and eliminate some landscape this. And that's at City Hall, that the guys can hand out right there in zoning and planning. Man, super helpful. So that's my pitch, guys. I don't know how you feel.
I 100% agree. I think it's one of those things we can do that doesn't really cost anybody anything, which is one of the problems we're sorting through right now, right? It doesn't cost, but it does benefit. And, I do think we want to be really thoughtful about what the density bonuses look like. I know there's been good ones and bad ones out there. And so I think looking at Flagstaff will be a great one. Amber, do we have other examples in the time you've been researching about density bonus?
I'd have to look at specific ones. The one that we put in here was kind of a combination of best practices and Tucson's and Flagstaff's, but to actually break them out into the individual ones, I'd have to pull them up.
I think John had brought one from Utah as well.
And because I'm so passionate about this, being a builder myself, or soon to be retired builder, so there's no conflict, I'll volunteer myself, unless one of you other guys want to step up, to be the liaison between planning and zoning and us, and to work out the details, get it in the weeds and see what we can get done.
I know we're trying to move forward as efficiently as we can as a committee right now. Amber, do you have a recommendation on, do we engage with planning and zoning on the side? What do you think?
So, especially hearing from Flagstaff and how they state the zoning things, when it comes to the policy, it sounds like simpler might be better, so that it doesn't have to continually come back to council if there's any changes or adjustments needed. And then the committee could work with planning and zoning on actually creating a procedure rather than a policy. So that would be my recommendation for the policy. I don't think there's any harm in talking to planning and zoning and seeing what that would look like. But for having it in the actual policy, I know she talked about zoning and the way it was written. Any changes can be complicated, and policies give you the same way. Any changes will need to go to council for changing.
So I just have a question for clarification, because as I'm understanding, we really need this language in the code, not necessarily policy, right? What is the process around that?
So similar. Taking anything to code or changing code would be through council as well. So if it's in the code, any changes will have to go to council. But if you put, and it wouldn't be bad to have it in code, just knowing that it would have to go to council for any adjustments or any changes. If it doesn't work, it would have to go through council again. So not a bad option. I would put it more vaguely probably in our policy to say referred to the code, rather than putting details in the policy, so that code can change as it needs to and not having to change both.
I guess the last thing I want to say on that topic is it seems like I think the committee is in agreement here that we want to be as flexible as we can going forward with what we do recommend, perhaps with the exception of actual code language for this density bonus, because that does enable a builder or developer to come right in and know what they can do to start a project. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I agree.
Yes, absolutely. You know, another thing, guys, this is not going to be easy. We've acknowledged that over the last year or so. So we need 7 active bodies on our board. We need all 7 brains working to work this out. It isn't going to come down to 2 of us or 3 of us. So I don't know what's going on with our next few meetings. I don't think there's one in May, I guess, Amber.
So I was going to kind of go through all of that with the policy and timelines, as well as new members and all of that. So how you guys want to format the rest of the meeting, it's kind of up to you. But for the policy, something has to come to council on May 27th. There's some options. We could just send a draft, not recommend to approve, not recommend anything, just send the draft as is or with some edits. You could vote to recommend the policy if you loved it. You could do that. I know there's probably some edits on that. Or we could have a special meeting between now and May. It would need to be probably in the next 2 weeks to continue going through the policy, just because chambers will be moving down to the first floor, so we won't have access to the room. So we don't have a May meeting because of that. So if you wanted another meeting, we could do that to go through it. Again, you don't have to recommend anything. You could just send the draft to council. I would love council to have it by the beginning of May, because I want them to have enough time to review it. So on May 27th, they'll have reviewed it, have been able to research it, look into it on their ends, so that they can give direction. And that way, if it's just a draft brought to them, they can give direction, and the policy could come back to the committee to keep working on.
So a couple concerns there. I guess, we can't have a meeting in May, so that already makes it difficult. We've had a problem coordinating everybody's schedules when we do these off-scheduled meetings. And I think it's important that we are allowed enough time to make an informed recommendation to council. So when I hear that we're required to give it to them on May 27th, I guess my question is why?
So at they had a council retreat in December, and they had serious concerns that the committee wasn't doing anything or weren't making actionable steps. So they actually wanted the policy sooner. May 27th was the next available study session we could get it on. They just want to see what you're working on. It doesn't have to be a recommended policy, but they want to see what it is.
I guess Connie left the room because I'd love to talk to her right now.
Well, and that was all of them wanting that. So that's kind of, even if, and I believe she's watching from home, she wasn't feeling good, but even if she wanted to push it off, the rest of council wanted it to come forward. So that was kind of their direction at the time, just so that they could look through it, see what you're working on. And it wouldn't be bad too, because if they look through it and they say, we dislike density bonuses, then you know not to put any more effort into that. Or if they say, we love the whole thing, keep polishing it, then that gives direction too, because they have the final say of what they actually want in this. So they would give us direction on, we want to keep the whole thing. We don't want to keep any of it. We want to keep just the employee programs. So having their direction so that you guys can focus what you continue working on is probably a good idea too.
I have a lot of thoughts running through my head right now, and I'm sure you guys do too. I guess I would like to recommend that if we can find a date that all of us can get together, that we have 100% attendance of the committee, all of us, where we can talk through this. I hesitate in making any promises because we want to do a thorough job and make the best recommendations we can. I can say personally, I've sent this policy language out to several builders because who better than to give us feedback, right? And so I think really trying to give them the most current version of what we're working on is also beneficial instead of, we keep changing, we keep updating these drafts. So, I do think, again, if we can all meet and then depending on how that meeting goes, if we feel like we're 100%, then great. And if we don't, then we're just sharing a draft, as you said, Amber. What do you guys think?
I think that'd be really important to do that. Not to mention, there's quite a few things that we learned today that I think incorporating in that draft would be really important before it goes to council on the 27th. Otherwise, I know there's things that we learned today that wouldn't be in the draft if we didn't do that. So.
And additionally, we're waiting on Flagstaff. We didn't ask Jennifer for a timeline, but maybe that's something you could kind of push her for, Amber.
Yeah, and she's been amazingly responsive. So I have no doubt we could probably get it probably this week or next at the latest.
So do we want to recommend a date right now while the four of us are comparing calendars, and then in the hopes that the others can make that happen?
Well, how about we let Amber put out a list again and everybody can put some potential dates or something, because I really want everybody here. 7 brains.
I agree, but I think the four of us should recommend those dates because we're already right here.
I agree, because I will say the emails that have gone out, I've gotten definitely not a quorum response in general. So having all 4 of you to at least have a quorum would be awesome.
Amber, you have to light a fire under everybody. Come on now.
I send you guys a lot of emails.
All next week is open.
I feel bad about how many emails
Are we going to have a representative at the council meeting in May when we present the draft? If we do, are we going to have a representative there or what?
So I would love the entire committee to be there, even the members who are going out, so that if there's questions, you guys can stand up and talk to them. I would actually even prefer the committee have presenters if you guys wanted to take turns, because it's important. This is your document. I'm happy to make it look pretty. I can even build the presentation, but this is a document that you guys have been working on. You've been doing all of the hard work for it. So making it clear to council that this is a committee document versus a staff document, I think is important.
Well, I think it has more impact. I remember some of the presentations that Nicole and Mike and I have done in the past, and it was effective. So yeah, I agree with that.
And you guys are allowed to be more passionate. We try to stick to unbiased facts. So.
These two are talking. I know. Sort of. Yeah, man.
So I'm just kind of
guys,
narrating a little bit. But
And Amber, when are we going to replace John? We're down one.
yes, so that's on our staff updates. I was just going to pull up the chamber calendar to see when we even have. So we can't use the 17th or 24th for this room. So kind of important tidbits. The shifting of the chambers from up here to down there is going to take a bit. So Chambers is unusable after next week, but we can use the executive conference room. It's just a little bit tighter. If we were to have a huge public attendance, I think we're probably okay.
Okay, Amber, so we just compared calendars. We're looking at the 17th or the 24th from 2 to 5 of April.
So that should be okay. Let me check the legal conference room because our executive conference room is not available either of those days. The legal conference room is open both days. So I'll send both those dates out. Even smaller of a room, so if we do have a lot of public engagement. And we also cannot stream that one on YouTube. So if anybody wants to watch it, they would have to come in person.
Thanks, Amber.
Okay. Are you ready for me to hop into staff updates?
Yes, please.
Okay. So we kind of went through this, but we don't have a May workforce housing meeting because of the room shifting. So I'll send out the dates for either April 17th or 24th, whichever we can get a quorum. We'd love to have everybody. For the timeline of John's position, as well as the outgoing vacancies, filling the whole thing so we have 7 again. I believe the subcommittee on appointments is meeting on April 17th. That means the recommended people will be brought to council either at the first meeting of May or the second. And then their first meeting would be June. So there's that timeline. And also, I was asked to bring information on the Yavapai County Workforce Development Board. Their next meeting is May 8th. They talk a lot about, we actually have John Heines on their board. They talk a lot about hiring, retention, unemployment, things like that. So kind of goes hand in hand. It doesn't sound like they actually talk about housing for workforce, but they talk about funding and a lot of things that NACOG used to handle that I guess this board is taken over. But they still work hand in hand with NACOG as well. So if you guys are interested, May 8th is their meeting. And it looks like they usually meet from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m.
That's to Randy's point, is that we're going to need all of us hitting the ground, not just here, but we need to be extensions into the community. To Randy's point, he speaks P&Z's language. Everything that we're looking at is not going to be addressed within the city limits of Prescott. So our partners within the county of Yavapai are a relevant resource that we need to consider. So they're looking at challenges of what are we going to do about attracting and retaining a workforce. So I would say that if we can continue to stay updated on their calendar, if at least one of us could attend their meetings so that we're in the loop, that would be beneficial to us as a committee.
I agree. Where is that meeting on May 8th?
So it is. It might change. The last meeting was at the APS building on Corsair. I don't know if that's where it always is, and they haven't published their agenda for the next one yet, so I don't know the actual location, but I can send that out to the committee once it's published. That's all I have.
Well, wonderful. Thanks, everybody. I know we've got a lot to do in a short amount of time, but I just want to say, as your committee chair, that I'm proud of all of you. If others aren't, well, then too bad. Meeting adjourned.